Key Out of Time by Andre Norton, Chapter 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by R.J. Davis. Key Out of Time by Andre Norton, Chapter 12. Baldies. Oh, Carwell clutched at Ross, her breath coming in little gasps, giving vent to her fear and horror. They had not known what might come from this plan. Certainly neither had foreseen the present chaos in the lagoon. Perhaps the broadcast energy of the enemy whipped the already vicious-tempered sulkars into this insane fury. But now the moonlit water was beaten into foam as the creatures fought there, attacking each other with a ferocity neither Terran had witnessed before. Lights gleamed along the shore, where the alien invaders must have been drawn by the clamor of the fighting marine reptiles. Somewhere in the heights above the beach of the lagoon, a picked band of rovers should now be making their way from the opposite side of Cayenne Ad under strict orders not to go into attack unless signaled. Whether the independent sea warriors would hold to that command was a question which had worried Ross from the first. Tina Raw and Taw in the waters and the seaweed of the reef, the two Terrans on that barrier itself, and between them and the shore the wild melee of maddened sulkers. Ross started. The sonic warning which had been pulsating steadily against his skin cut off sharply. The broadcast in the bay had been silenced. This was the time to move, but no swimmer could last in the lagoon itself. Along the reef, Carwell said. That would be the long way round, Ross knew, but the only one possible. He studied the cluster of lights ashore. 2 or 3 figures moved there. Seemingly the attention of the aliens was well centered upon the battle still in progress in the lagoon. Stay here, he ordered the girl, adjusting his mask. Ross dropped into the water, cutting away from the reef and turning to swim parallel with it. Tina Raw matched him as he went, guiding Ross to a second break in the reef toward the shore some distance from where the conflict of sulkars still made a hideous din in the night. The Terran waited in the shadows, stripping off his flippers and snapping them to his belt, letting his mask swing free on his chest. He angled towards the beach where the aliens had been. At least he was better armed for this than he had been when he had fronted the rovers with only a diver's knife. From the time agent supplies, he had taken the single hand weapon he had long ago found in the armory of the derelict spaceship. This could only be used sparingly, since they did not know how it could be recharged, and the secret of its beam still remained secret as far as Terran technicians were concerned. Ross worked his way to a curtain of underbrush from which he had a free view of the beach and the aliens. 3 of them he counted, and they were baldies all right, taller and thinner than his own species. Their bald heads, gray-white, the upper dome of their skulls overshadowing the features of their pointed chin faces. They all wore the skin-tight blue, purple, green suits of the space forgers. Suits which Ross knew of old were insulated and protective for their wearers, as well as a medium for keeping in touch with one another. Just as he, wearing one, had once been trailed over miles of wilderness. To him, all 3 of the invaders looked enough alike to have been stamped out of one pattern, and their movements suggested that they worked or went into action with drilled precision. They all faced seaward, holding tubes aimed at the sulkar-infested lagoon. There was no sound of any explosion, but green spears of light struck at the scaled bodies plunging in the water, and where those beams struck, flesh seared. Methodically, the trio raked the basin, but Ross noted those beams which had been steady at his first sighting were now interrupted by flickers. One of the baldies upended his tube, rapped its butt against a rock as if trying to correct a jamming. When the alien went into action once again, His weapon flashed and failed. Within a matter of moments, the other two were also finished. The lighted rods pushed into the sand, giving a glow to the scene, darkened as a fire might sink to embers, power fading. An ungainly shape floundered out of the churned water, lumbered over the shale of the beach, its subtle neck outstretched, its horned nose down for a gore-threatening charge. Ross had not realized that the Salkars could operate out of what he thought was their natural element. But this wild-eyed dragon was plainly bent on reaching its tormentors. For a moment or two the Baldies continued to front the creature, almost, Ross thought, as if they could not believe that their weapons had failed them. Then they broke and ran back to the fairing, which they had taken with such contemptuous ease. The Salkar plowed along in their wake, but its movements grew more labored the further it advanced, until at last it lay with only its head upraised, darting it back and forth, its fanged jaws well agape, voicing a coughing howl. Its plaint was answered from the water as a second of its kind wallowed ashore. A terrible wound had torn skin and flesh just behind its neck, yet still it came on, hissing and bubbling a battle challenge. It did not attack its fellow, instead it dragged its bulk past the first comer on its way after the Baldies. The Salkars continued to come ashore. Two more, a third, a fourth, mangled and torn, pulling themselves as far as they could up the beach, to lie facing inland, their necks weaving, their horned heads bobbing, their cries a frightful din. What had drawn them out of their preoccupation of battle among themselves into this attempt to reach the aliens, Ross could not determine. Unless the intelligence of the beast was such that they had been able to connect the searing beams which the Baldies had turned on them so tellingly with the men on the beach, and had responded by striving to reach a common enemy. But no desire could give them the necessary energy to pull far ashore. Almost helplessly beached, they continued to dig into the yielding sand with their flippers in a vain effort to pursue the aliens. Ross skirted the clamoring berry of Salkars and headed for the ferry. A neck snapped about, a head was lowered in his direction. He smelled the rank stench of reptile combined with burned flesh. The nearest of the brutes must have scented the Terran in turn, as it was now trying vainly to edge around to cut across Ross's path. But it was completely outclassed on land, and the man dodged it easily. 3 Baldies had fled this way, yet Jazia had reported 5 had come out of the sea to take Kyanad. 2 were missing. Where? Had they remained in the fairing? Were they now in the sub? And that sub, what had happened to it? The broadcast had been cut off. He had seen the failure of the weapons and the shore lights. Might the sub have suffered from Salkar attack? Though Ross could hardly believe that the beast could wreck it. The Terran was traveling blindly, keeping well under cover of such brush as he could, knowing only that he must head inland. Under his feet the ground was rising, and he recalled the nature of this territory as Torgal and Jazia had pictured it for him. This had to be part of the ridge wall of the valley in which lay the buildings of the ferry. In these heights was the shrine of Puka, where Jazia had hidden now. To the west now lay the rover village, so he had to work his way left, downhill, in order to reach the hole where the Baldies had gone to ground. Ross made that progress with the stealth of a trained scout. Havakakia's moon, triple in size to Terra's companion, was up, and the landscape was sharply clear, with shadows well defined. The glow, weird to Terran eyes, added to the effect of being abroad in a nightmare, and the bellowing of the grounded Salkars continued a devil's course. When the rovers had put up the buildings of their fairing, they had cleared a series of small fields radiating outward from those structures. All of these were now covered with crops almost ready to harvest. The grain, if that Terran term could be applied